When I turned 25, I wed Dr. Adrian, a distinguished medical specialist. He exerted significant control over our relationship, yet his love for me was absent. His only attachment stemmed from the fact that I bore the heart of his unforgettable first love. Dr. Adrian once remarked, "Thrive and I'll consent to anything." Later, when I was critically ill and teetering on the edge of life, Adrian employed every possible method to sustain me. "Vivian, you must continue living, if only for this heart." Until the day his cherished first love, presumed dead, resurfaced, I drew my final breath, and Adrian descended into madness. Years after graduation, tales of how I captivated the attention of the legendary surgeon Dr. Adrian still circulate among my former classmates. On a typical weekend, after 3 years apart, old friends gathered for a reunion. Amidst the lively chatter, the class president inquired, "Vivian, why isn't Mr. Xander here?" I awkwardly responded, "He has surgery tonight." Many classmates who had achieved considerable success attended the gathering. However, none could rival Dr. Adrian, a renowned medical figure at B University. In his early 30s, he had already made significant strides in organ transplantation. His reputation was invaluable. The class president's invitation to me was largely due to Adrian. "I recall Vivian went through a lot to win over Mr. Xander, right?" someone mentioned, capturing everyone's attention. "Yes, Vivian, how did you manage it?" With a hint of bitterness in my smile, I replied, "It just happened." They believed I had quietly won over the elusive star of the medical school. What they didn't realize was that behind this seemingly perfect union lay endless sorrow. If I could turn back time, I'd prefer never to have met Adrian. When Adrian arrived, the gathering was almost over. He had just completed surgery, and as he entered the room, the scent of antiseptics overshadowed the lingering aroma of alcohol. He remained as dignified and aloof as ever, an untouchable figure. Classmates treated him like a celebrity, rising to greet him. The class president, caught up in the excitement, casually mentioned, "By the way, Dr. Lee said the slot for the Europe trip next month is reserved for Vivian. I hope Dr. Xander won't object to her going." I tensed, feeling suddenly anxious as I glanced at Adrian. I hadn't found the right moment to inform him about this. Now he was hearing it from someone else. Adrian paused, then offered a faint smile and said, "She's a light sleeper and doesn't adjust well to new environments, so she might not be able to go. I'll discuss it with Dr. Lee myself." He then gently patted my head. "Be good and stay home." His words immediately sparked envy among the others. "Vivian, you're so fortunate in your marriage. I'm envious. If everything's so perfect, why even consider going to Europe? Just stay." But I had been striving for that opportunity for a long time. I grabbed my bag and forced a smile. "Sorry, something came up at home. I have to leave." With that, I turned and exited. As I stepped into the chilly air, a gust of wind wrapped a jacket around my shoulders. The familiar scent of antiseptic grew stronger. "It's too cold to go out on a rainy day. You can't handle it?" I smiled slightly, dismissing any thoughts of confrontation. "All right." On the way home, Adrian drove. After a long pause, I brought up the topic again. "Next month, I don't want to go on vacation. I want to go to Europe." Adrian tapped the steering wheel without responding. When he acted like this, it signified he was contemplating rejecting my request. "I won't joke about my health. I promise." As we waited at a red light, Adrian turned to me. His calm, composed gaze pierced through the night. "Vivian, I'm not willing to take the risk." My smile faltered, and a dull ache spread through my chest. He was more concerned about my well-being than I was. The heart beating within me, warm and strong, didn't belong to me. It belonged to his unforgettable first love, Isabella. All my passions and ambitions had to yield to this heart. The world believed Adrian loved me deeply, but little did they know that this heart was the sole thing that could truly capture his soul. On our way back, Adrian and I fell into a silent Cold War. Exiting the car, I walked ahead without concern for whether Adrian followed. I nearly slammed the door on his hand. "Vivian, don't throw a tantrum." I stubbornly retorted, "I am a person, not one of your possessions. Is it wrong for me to want to pursue my dreams?" Adrian wrapped his arms around my waist, pressing me against the doorway, and gently placed a cold kiss on my lips. "Vivian, you lack nothing. Bags, shoes, clothes, jewelry, even the envy of others. You have it all. Why would you want to go out there and suffer? Indeed, Adrian had provided me with so much. Under his protection, I could have lived a peaceful life, but that's not what I desired. I pushed away his touch and, for the first time, spoke to him with a hardened tone. I'm not asking for your permission. I didn't want to look back on my life dying from illness filled with regret. The atmosphere grew tense. Adrian's deep eyes were hidden in the darkness, making his emotions unreadable. A soft chuckle echoed, spreading coldness. Vivian, I can't control you anymore, can I? He lifted me into his arms and carried me to the bedroom. The kisses he bestowed were filled with affection, pulling me into a whirlpool of emotions. Adrian knew all too well how to make me relent. And those hands, accustomed to performing surgeries, always made me surrender and compromise. Be good, okay? You know I can't live without you. Vivian, I'll love you for the rest of my life. I looked up at him, this man who passionately declared his love. Who could have guessed that before the heart transplant, Adrian had been indifferent to me? After the surgery, it was as if overnight he had become madly in love with me, obsessed with controlling me. Back then, I thought he loved me deeply. It wasn't until later that I realized it was because he had personally placed Isabella's heart inside my chest. But by the time I knew the truth, it was too late. Late at night, Adrian, still upset over my outburst, ceased comforting me. He wiped away my tears, his fingertips grazing the scar on my chest. Vivian, I performed your surgery myself. I'm responsible for your body. I'd heard this reason countless times before, but this time, I didn't care anymore. Adrian bathed me, and just as we finished, he received a call. On the other end was the sound of a woman sobbing. Brother-in-law, I accidentally broke the vase that my sister left behind. I'm sorry. Lying in bed, I didn't need to guess. It was Isabella's sister calling. Her name was Amelia, a university student still in her prime. She bore an uncanny resemblance to Isabella. I remembered when Isabella passed away. She was about Amelia's age. Perhaps because Amelia looked so much like Isabella, Adrian covered all her tuition and living expenses. Adrian had explained, she's Isabella's sister. I have a duty to take care of her. As a result, Amelia loved flaunting this in front of me. Her favorite thing to say was, if it weren't for the fact that you have my sister's heart, Adrian would have married me. After hanging up, Adrian got dressed, but I stopped him. It's late, it's just a broken vase. You can go tomorrow. I couldn't accept it. Why was a living, breathing person worth less than a broken vase? Adrian's gaze turned cold in the darkness. He pushed me back onto the bed and dodged the issue. Get some sleep. Good night. With the soft sound of the door closing, Adrian left. Soon after, I received a message from Amelia. Just a vase? Hilarious. What makes you think you can compare to me and my sister? You're just a container. Don't think you're anything special. It turned out that when I had stopped Adrian, he hadn't ended the call. My freshly washed hair gradually dried in the breeze, and my body grew completely cold. Furious, I replied, "Look who's talking, eating your sister's blood-stained bread. You're no saint either." As I put down my phone, my thoughts drifted to 3 years ago. That summer, the news of the renowned violinist Isabella's death swept across the internet. Media outlets and social networks were filled with regret for such a genius passing away so young. At that time, the biggest rumor circulating at school was that Isabella had been Adrian's girlfriend, a musical prodigy and a medical genius, a perfect match. But despite all the time I'd spent pursuing Adrian, I'd never seen Isabella by his side. Upon hearing the news, I rushed to the hospital where Adrian worked to wait for him. I anxiously waited for days before I finally saw him. He was the same as ever, impeccably clean to the point of obsession. Nothing about him suggested the grief-stricken skeletal man that the rumors had described. That day was the happiest of my life because it was the first time Adrian spoke to me in such a long time. He said, "Vivian, do you have a congenital heart condition and are waiting for a transplant? I found a donor. I can help you. If you agree, you'll soon be able to undergo the transplant surgery." It felt like a dream come true. The doctors had said that if I didn't undergo a heart transplant, I might not live past my 20s. Having the surgery might extend my life. So without hesitation, I agreed. That day, I lay on the cold metal bed in the operating room, and the man I loved stood above me in a green surgical gown, bathed in harsh white light like a god sent to save me. When I woke up, Adrian was by my side, his gentle gaze enveloping me. He said, "Vivian, will you be my girlfriend?" Had I never known whose heart it was, maybe my life would have been filled with happiness forever. I barely slept the entire night. Early the next morning, I received a call from my assistant. "Miss Vivian, the spot for Europe is gone." I sat up in bed feeling dazed. That was a spot Dr. Lee specifically reserved for me. How could it be gone? "I heard that someone from your school, a very influential senior, pulled some strings and got in." Before I could respond to my assistant, I got a message from Dr. Lee. "If you're not feeling well, don't push yourself. Get some rest." I hurriedly called Dr. Lee back. "Dr. Lee, I'm feeling fine." Dr. Lee sounded confused. "Huh? Adrian called me this morning to cancel, saying you weren't feeling well." He didn't discuss this with me. "Dr. Lee, I've been waiting for this opportunity for over half a year. Can't I still—" "It's too late," Dr. Lee sighed. He recommended a girl named Amelia, and the list has already been submitted. At this point, I had no choice but to plead desperately. "Dr. Lee, even if it's as a volunteer or a temporary worker, as long as I can go to Europe with the team, I'll take it." "Well, all right, I'll see what I can do. Wait for my update." After dealing with that, I scrolled through Amelia's social media. She had posted a photo of the application form. Another day of being pampered. Someone commented, "That expedition is so hard to get into." "You actually made it in," Amelia replied with a smirking emoji. "What can I say? He spoils me, ha ha ha." I felt a sharp pain in my chest. After taking my medication, I decided to confront Adrian. He hadn't come home last night. He sent me a message in the middle of the night saying he had been called back to the hospital for surgery. When I got to the hospital, I first went to pick up the report. It was from the physical examination Adrian had arranged for me a week ago. It showed everything was normal. Heart function was good, and moderate exercise was allowed. I had planned to use this report to convince him to let me go to Europe. As I approached his office, I overheard a conversation inside. "Vivian has been waiting so long for this. Canceling it like that is too much, don't you think?" The voice belonged to Adrian's university roommate and current colleague, Eric. Adrian's tone was indifferent. "If something happens to her abroad, I won't be able to do anything. Come on, I saw her report. As long as she takes her medication, she's as healthy as anyone else. We're professionals here. Don't give me that nonsense." Adrian didn't respond. Eric probed further. "Don't tell me this is all for that other girl." "It is." Even though I knew the truth, hearing Adrian admit it so bluntly was still excruciating. Adrian's voice was cold and calm. "I don't care about her life or death, but the heart must be fine." With those words, my heart skipped a beat. What followed was a relentless throbbing pain. Clutching my chest, I slowly sank to the floor, tears falling uncontrollably. When I first learned the truth about our marriage from Amelia's lips, I had cried my heart out. For a long time, I kept telling myself that people aren't made of stone. Surely with time he would come to care for me. But the truth proved otherwise. Adrian's heart was made of stone. That day, I didn't barge into the office. I sat numbly on a bench in the hospital for a long time, until I received a message from Dr. Lee. "There's a volunteer spot, but the work will be tough. Are you still interested?" Without thinking, I immediately accepted. Dr. Lee confirmed, "Pack your things quickly. The team leaves today." On the way back, I sat in a taxi doing my best to stifle my sobs. Adrian called, but I hung up. I focused on packing my things for the airport. Before leaving, I took some important documents with me because I had made up my mind to get a divorce. Amelia had a complex expression when she saw me at the airport. I was wearing a volunteer's uniform, carrying a box of bottled water, and approached each member waiting to board, letting them take one from inside. Amelia, young and bold, couldn't hide her little thoughts. She waved at me with a smug grin. "Come over here, I'm thirsty." I ignored her and went straight to Dr. Lee. "Dr. Lee, would you like some water?" Amelia got annoyed. "Are you deaf? Didn't you hear me talking to you? Using my sister's heart as if it's something you deserve?" I coldly snapped back, "Donate a kidney and I'll get down on my knees." I'm not someone who easily loses my temper, but seeing that face, I couldn't hold it in. I think I'm going crazy. Every time I see Amelia, I just want to hit her. Amelia called out in a spoiled tone. Is this how you treat the family of the organ donor? Her words drew the attention of the people around us, and some even started filming with their phones. Dr. Lee frowned. Enough. If you want water, get it yourself. Stop causing a scene. It had been so long since anyone had spoken up for me that I lowered my head, sitting next to her with slightly reddened eyes. Dr. Lee, I'm sorry for causing trouble. Dr. Lee sighed. I didn't call you here to let you be bullied. Amelia huffed, turned away, and began typing furiously on her phone. The boarding announcement echoed, and everyone started to board the plane. After a flight of more than 20 hours, we arrived in Europe. As soon as the plane landed, my phone lit up with several missed calls. They were all from Adrian. I didn't want to deal with him, but he called Amelia instead. After a few brief words, Amelia handed the phone to me, her face gleeful. Adrian's voice, cold as ice, came clearly through the receiver. Vivienne, why did you act on your own? He sounded obviously angry, like the last time when I brought up the divorce. My heart was filled with grievance, and I replied dryly, when you gave Amelia the spot without consulting me, you didn't ask for my opinion either. Amelia let out a derisive snicker as if laughing at my foolishness. On the other end, there was a long silence. So long that it made me feel uneasy. I thought Adrian was going to yell at me, but he said nothing and hung up the phone instead. The sound of the disconnecting line shattered all my plans. No apology, no explanation, not even a question. All of his anger was left in the abrupt end of the call, leaving me to endlessly second-guess myself. Had I done something wrong? Soon I realized that this wasn't right. I wasn't wrong. It was just that Adrian's control over me all these years made me feel like I was. I wiped away my tears and threw the phone back at Amelia. She yelped in surprise, clearly startled. The next day, just before we set off for Vienna, I saw Adrian at the hotel entrance. Amelia and I had just stepped out of the elevator. When she saw Adrian, her eyes lit up, and she rushed over. Brother-in-law? Even after all this time since Isabella's passing, Amelia insisted on calling him that, and Adrian never corrected her. His cold gaze softened in an instant. I need to talk to your sister Vivienne. I'll take you to dinner later. Amelia smiled sweetly. Okay. She shot me a smug look, and I knew it was her who had tipped him off. Adrian's tone turned serious. Vivienne, we need to talk. From the corner of the hotel lobby came the sharp sound of my voice. I don't think I did anything wrong. Don't you dare yell at me. My emotions got the best of me, and I couldn't help the tears in my eyes. Adrian sat across from me, his dark eyes locked onto my face. For a moment, I thought he wanted to strangle me, but that feeling quickly passed. He returned to his calm, polished self. His tone was steady. You didn't do anything wrong. The mistake was mine. What do you mean? My mistake was not completely cutting off your path, Adrian said, sipping his tea slowly. Go ahead and play this time, but there won't be a next time. I knew that with his connections, he could easily make that happen. I shot to my feet, furious. Adrian, what gives you the right to control me? I have the right to make my own choices. Rights? He let out a cold laugh, no longer showing any mercy. With someone else's heart in your chest, what rights do you think you have? He finally said it. The words I had feared, blunt, cruel, and direct. In his eyes, I should just be eternally grateful for being the vessel of this heart. I couldn't breathe. The air felt thick and suffocating. I picked up the glass of water in front of me and threw it at Adrian's face. The lemon water dripped down his jaw slowly. For the first time, I saw a mocking look in his dark eyes. He said nothing, but Amelia rushed over in a panic, pulling out a handkerchief to wipe his face. Vivienne, who gave you permission to treat my sister like this? I couldn't take it anymore, and threw the water at her too. My emotions surged, making my heart race painfully. Everything went dark for a moment. Amelia screamed, drenched from head to toe. Brother-in-law, is she crazy? Adrian's expression turned icy. I thought he would yell at me, demand I apologize to Amelia. But calmly, he asked a server for some napkins and handed them to Amelia. Then he smiled apologetically at the server, speaking in perfect English. Sorry, my wife hasn't been feeling well lately. Apologies for the trouble. Everyone around us heard his words. In front of everyone, Adrian painted me as a madwoman. Then he looked at Amelia with a quiet warning in his eyes. "Aren't you hungry? Let's go eat." Amelia, realizing she had messed up, stuck out her tongue. "Okay." "Adrian." My chest tightened, and I instinctively called his name. In a disappointed tone, Adrian said, "I'm heading to Vienna for a conference soon. Do whatever you want. I can't control you anymore. Just remember to take your meds on time." After the heart transplant, I had to take medication long-term to prevent organ rejection. It's the phrase he said to me most often. Then he walked away with Amelia in tow. And I, feeling unwell, returned to the hotel. The service wasn't great. The food they brought was cold. I forced a few bites before lying back down on the bed. I opened my phone and saw Amelia's social media post. The weather was nice, and Amelia and Adrian were sitting at a fast food restaurant. In front of Amelia was a kid's meal. Adrian sat across from her, looking at his phone, a trace of a helpless smile on his lips. I felt a twinge of sadness. Even Amelia seemed to have more freedom than I did. She could do whatever she wanted. If something went wrong, Adrian would back her up. But because of this heart, I had to tread on eggshells. No drinking, no junk food, no late nights, no intense emotions. I didn't even have the right to be happy. Even smiling in front of Adrian felt like a crime. What a joyless life this had become. The next part of our itinerary proceeded smoothly according to the delegation's plan. On the third day, we arrived in Vienna. Adrian had forcibly delayed his schedule until the end of the month. Eric sent me a message. "Impressive, Vivian. You've got Dr. Adrian so captivated that the dean said if he doesn't come back soon, his pay will be docked." I replied with a facepalm emoji. I figured Adrian wasn't delaying his schedule for me. Vienna was a place Isabella had spent time in. More than once, I'd heard Amelia beg Adrian to take her there to honor her sister's memory. As the evening darkened, the streets filled with people. The delegation was counting the number of people going to the concert. There were only 2 tickets left, and Amelia said, "Vivian has a heart condition and is a volunteer, so she doesn't need to go." According to the rules, volunteers should indeed be at the end of the line. But one of those tickets was given to me by Dr. Lee. Without batting an eye, I walked past Amelia and grabbed a ticket from the leader's hand. Amelia stomped her foot in anger. "Vivian, who gave you permission to take that ticket?" I ignored her shouting and headed toward the concert hall. What I didn't expect was for her to call Adrian. A few minutes later, she rushed over, holding her phone on speaker, bumping into me as she did. "Vivian, you can't go to crowded places. Be good. This is for your own good." Here it was again. Every time I would convince myself that Adrian was doing it for my sake. But this time, was it still the same? "Adrian, can you shut up?" My voice was trembling. "Just this once. I beg you to shut up. She already has a ticket. Even if I have to waste it, she won't get it." Adrian paused. "Fine." Amelia, thrown off by his compromise, glared at me, unwilling to accept it. I knew her initial plan was to go with Adrian himself. She hadn't expected Adrian couldn't control me. As we went to have our tickets checked, a staff member suddenly stopped me. "Ma'am, your family member called us to say you have a serious heart condition and provided medical documentation. We can't allow you to enter for your own health." Everyone had already passed security and was waiting for me. It was awkward. I patiently explained to the staff, "My heart condition is stable." "Sorry, we can't make that determination." Suddenly, all eyes were on me. Some were filled with sympathy, others with surprise. After all, no one expected that, as my husband, Adrian would use such tactics to prevent his own wife from entering. Everyone in the group knew my condition had stabilized and that a simple concert wouldn't cause any harm. But Adrian was too authoritative, and no profit-driven venue was willing to take on that kind of risk. Amelia blocked behind me, intentionally bumped into me, and squeezed past. She stuck her tongue out at me triumphantly. "Your ticket is invalid now." At that moment, I had only one thought. If I couldn't see the concert, neither could she. I suddenly raised my hand and slapped her, grabbing her hair and dragging her back out through the gate. Amelia screamed in pain as I yanked hard. For the next few minutes, we were caught in a physical struggle. She was young and strong. If you think about it, it was mutual combat. Honestly, I didn't want to embarrass myself in a foreign country like this. But I had bottled up too much frustration, and if I didn't fight back, I would have lost my mind. By the time Adrian arrived, Amelia was sitting on the ground bawling. and I sat silently by the fountain, blood trickling down from my forehead. Amelia threw herself into Adrian's arms, tearfully complaining, "Brother-in-law, how could she? How dare she hit me?" Adrian draped his coat over Amelia, not even asking for the details, and directly ordered me, "Vivian, apologize." I trembled with anger. Why isn't she apologizing to me? Because you started it. I lost control and shouted at him, "You should know why I hit her." I could feel my heart racing, my breathing becoming rapid, and a cold chill running through my body. Adrian spoke coldly. "Setting everything else aside, do you not know your own health condition? She's doing this for your good, and you still think you're in the right?" This time I said nothing. I curled up by the fountain, trying to suppress my escalating emotions and weakening body. Nightfall thickened, and the neon lights along the street flickered on. Amelia thought she had won and continued her petty attack, whispering to Adrian, "I've never seen such an overconfident woman. If she'd given it to me earlier, this whole mess wouldn't have happened. What a troublemaker." As the fountain burst into a dazzling spray of water, I stiffened like a stone and toppled backward into the pool. My heart condition relapsed. I was rushed to the local hospital. They say that during the emergency, Adrian almost lost control and tried to break into the operating room. In the end, it took several people to hold him back. Amelia, eyes wide open, mocked my weak body on the side, and Adrian yelled at her on the spot. He even called her a useless fool. Amelia boarded the flight back home in tears. I brushed past death once more, and when I woke up, I saw Adrian sitting by my bedside. He looked worn out with dark circles under his eyes as if he hadn't slept in days. His dark, intense gaze sent a chill down my spine. But for the first time, I felt relief. So he does suffer too. Watching the heart of someone you love gradually stop beating must be painful, right? I looked at him and calmly said, "Let's get a divorce." Though he cared for me meticulously, he never treated me with dignity. I didn't want to live like this anymore. At my words, Adrian let out a mocking laugh. "Divorce? You think I'd ever let you go?" He uncharacteristically lost his temper with me. "I told you not to come to Europe. Why didn't you listen? Don't you know heart patients need to control their emotions? With a body as weak as yours, you still dared to fight with Amelia? Vivian, you're always so self-righteous." Each sentence was more cutting than the last. His fear over the past few days had made him take it out on me. But he forgot that if it weren't for Amelia, this trip to Europe could have been peaceful. I closed my eyes, not wanting to argue with him anymore. Suddenly, Adrian grabbed my face, forcing me to look at him. He warned me word by word, "Vivian, take care of yourself. Don't stir up any more trouble, got it?" I smiled. "Adrian, I don't think I have much time left. Can't you just treat me a little better?" Adrian, hearing this, stormed out in a rage, slamming the door behind him. I spent a long time recovering, and by the time I was discharged, I had lost a lot of weight. After this episode, my body was far from what it used to be. I could barely walk a few steps without getting short of breath. This delay stretched into April. The willows were blooming, and the grass was growing. I returned home. Currently, I'm in a one-sided Cold War with Adrian. After returning, I went straight to my bedroom. Adrian followed me, reminding me, "I've fallen behind on work, so I'll be staying at the hospital for a few days. The medication is on the bedside table. Make sure you take it. Okay?" In truth, I didn't care where he was going. Maybe he was off to comfort the heartbroken Amelia. Maybe it was for something else. But none of that concerned me anymore. After Adrian left, I picked up my phone and consulted a lawyer. The lawyer said that if Adrian didn't agree, I might have to be separated for over a year before the divorce could be finalized. So, I began secretly looking for houses in other cities behind Adrian's back. However, ever since my last hospital stay, my health hadn't been great. I often experienced chest tightness and palpitations. I secretly went to see another doctor, and the prognosis wasn't optimistic. I didn't dare think about it, but maybe before a year was up, Adrian would become a widower. That day, I visited several places with a real estate agent. By 12:30 p.m., passing by a small park, I was exhausted and had to sit down, watching the nearby children feed the pigeons. I saw a post Amelia had just updated on her social media saying, "An old man's apology is still so moving." I chuckled and casually tossed my phone back into my pocket. The midday sun was warm, heating up my hair and jacket. Suddenly, someone stood in front of me, blocking the sunlight. "You must be Vivian." It was a woman's voice. I opened my eyes and met a face that was both familiar and unfamiliar, leaving me momentarily stunned. I had seen this face before in one of Adrian's secret photos. Why did she look exactly like Isabella? The woman smiled as she brushed her hair aside. "I heard from my sister that you bullied her. All these years, you all seemed to think I was dead." Seeing me staring at her dumbfounded, Isabella gave a proud, cold smile. "Hello, let me formally introduce myself. I'm Adrian's first love, Isabella. Can you keep it a secret for me? I want to surprise him." She seemed to expect to see fear on my face, the fear of losing Adrian. But the heavy pain in my chest, like a boulder pressing down, left me struggling for breath. If Isabella is alive, then whose heart do I have? Isabella noticed my shock and offered an explanation. "Your heart was donated by my fellow senior from the academy, and our professor helped transport it back home. Somehow people spread the rumor that it was my heart. I've always been afraid to see Adrian, fearing he'd blame me for leaving without saying goodbye. Now that I'm back, can you return him to me?" I forced myself to stand and walked back the way I came. Tears streamed down my face. So all these years of torment were a joke. I could have been living happily. The wind picked up, and the air around me grew cold. Shivering, I pulled out my phone intending to call Adrian. The moment the call connected, everything went black, and I collapsed forward. I was admitted to the ICU. They say Adrian used every possible method to pull me back from death's door. Of course, it came at a price. My body was covered in tubes. A long white tube connected to the ventilator at the head of my bed, its end inserted into my throat. I couldn't speak. Many people came to see me, telling me that I would get better. But I wasn't stupid. Their expressions told me I didn't have much time left. When I woke from the endless dreams, someone was holding my hand. Adrian stood by my side, wearing a white coat, gazing at me tenderly. "Vivian, you're awake." Those were the first words he said to me years ago after I received my transplant. Back then, they sounded like music to my ears. Now they felt like the devil's whisper. Instinctively, I tried to pull out the tubes, only to realize my hands and feet were restrained. Adrian gently coaxed me. "Be good. Focus on getting better. Don't resist." I remembered telling Adrian once that if I ever reached a terminal stage, I didn't want to be resuscitated. I had seen patients lying in the ICU just like I was now, stripped of dignity, manipulated at the mercy of others. But obviously, Adrian hadn't respected my wishes. He was my next of kin. He chose to use every possible method to keep me alive until the bitter end. Of course, how could I expect him to show me mercy? He never loved me, only the heart that beats inside me. Doesn't he know Isabella is still alive? I began thrashing my hands tied to the railing, trying to tell him the truth. Adrian frowned. "Give her a sedative." Then he gently smoothed my messy hair and placed a soft kiss on my forehead. "Vivian, sleep now. Don't worry. I'll stay with you." Uncontrollably, I closed my eyes and fell into a deep sleep. I don't even know how many times I've passed through death's door by now. It's an unbearable feeling. Each time I was brought back from unconsciousness, I sank into deeper despair. Even the nurses whispered in pity, "Dr. Adrian is so cruel. He's revived her 6 times now, and she's broken several ribs. If I were her family, I'd let her go with dignity." Exactly. Even the people around me understand what Adrian can't. Adrian hasn't visited me as often lately because every time he came, I caused a scene. Once or twice he could still be patient and comfort me. But, as it happened more often, he became annoyed. "Vivian, who do you think is to blame for this? Didn't you insist on going to Europe? Be good, will you?" As time went on, I gave up trying to tell Adrian the truth. After all, I couldn't speak, my body was too weak, and I was too far gone. Even writing was difficult. In the end, even dying became a luxury. I often wondered what Isabella was doing. Did she think it was fun playing hide-and-seek with Adrian and refusing to show herself? If she had come earlier, could I have died with dignity? I lay in the ICU day after day, night after night, having lost all sense of time. Then, on a warm afternoon, sunlight streamed through the window, landing on me. It reminded me of the time years ago after my surgery, full of hope. Suddenly, I felt this moment was filled with hope too. Back then, it was hope for life. Now it was hope for death. My body felt light, as though I could write a few words. Adrian seemed to sense something, speaking absent-mindedly. "Vivian, please calm down, okay? If you survive, I'll give you whatever you want. This is a special medicine. Once you take it, you'll get better." How laughable. Was he comforting me or himself? Maybe Adrian hadn't even realized that since we got married, the phrase he said to me the most was, "Take your medicine." He didn't even know what my favorite food was. Earlier, the nurse had loosened my restraints a bit, so I grabbed the pen nearby and started writing on the small whiteboard with all the strength I had. At the last moment, I wanted to leave something behind. I thought about it and began writing. Suddenly, the nurse walked in. "Dr. Adrian, there's someone outside. She says her name is Isabella." Adrian froze. After a brief silence, he suddenly let go of my hand and rushed out. At the same time, everything went dark. I heard the sound of the monitor beeping. It announced that I was once again critically ill. But this time, Adrian probably wasn't coming back. As Dr. Adrian dashed out of his office, he caught sight of a familiar face, reminiscent of days gone by. Neat and spirited, Isabella approached him, her long hair flowing gracefully, hands clasped behind her back, and a warm smile on her face. "What's the matter, Professor? Don't you recognize me?" "Isabella..." Dr. Adrian felt a surge of disbelief, as if he had entered an alternate reality. He whispered, "Weren't you dead?" A hint of irritation flickered across Isabella's features. Blame the reporters from back then. Their language skills were lacking, and they misunderstood everything. I've been abroad all these years, completely unaware of how they portrayed me back home. "But that heart..." Isabella paused thoughtfully. "That heart belonged to a senior member of our music troupe. She died in an accident, and her heart was sent back, donated to a girl." The mention of the girl made Dr. Adrian's heart sink. In that instant, Vivian consumed his entire thoughts. Without a moment's hesitation, he ignored Isabella's attempts to reach out and hurried back inside, as if some force was urging him to return quickly, or he would never see Vivian again. Pushing open the door, Dr. Adrian recalled how Vivian had been struggling to write something on a piece of paper just moments before. An overwhelming urge to see it took hold of him. Turning the corner, all he saw was a sea of white. Several colleagues in white coats surrounded Vivian's bed. On the nearby monitor, a flat line stretched across the screen, unyielding and final. No signs of life remained. Dr. Adrian's mind went blank, with a buzzing in his ears. He faintly heard Mr. Xander's voice, sounding as if he were announcing the time of death. Who had died? For the first time, Dr. Adrian found the sounds of the ICU machines unbearable. He pushed through the crowd and saw Vivienne, her expression serene. Her face was pale, as if she were merely sleeping. Dr. Adrian gently touched her face and called out, "Vivian?" The only response was a cold, lifeless body. An overwhelming sense of absurdity filled his mind. How could Vivian be dead? Mr. Xander's voice carried a sharp edge. "Vivian has no family, and since you've just discovered your first love, I suppose you won't have time to handle her funeral arrangements. My wife and I will take care of it." Only in these last few days had Mr. Xander come to understand why Dr. Adrian had treated Vivian the way he did. All this suffering just for a heart, leaving her to die in agony. Rumors had spread throughout the department, and now no one sided with Dr. Adrian. Suddenly, Dr. Adrian remembered something and quickly glanced at Vivian's right hand. He saw the pen she had used lying on the whiteboard next to her. In crooked, shaky handwriting, mixed with letters, was the faint outline of a sentence. "I like grilled fish." Dr. Adrian's mind flashed back to what he had said earlier. "Take your medicine. I like grilled fish." This seemingly simple statement now felt like a heavy blow, shattering his composure. In that moment, all their past was laid bare before him. It was painfully clear how awful he had been. He had told her countless times to take her medicine, but he didn't even know she liked grilled fish. Suddenly, Dr. Adrian lost control, grabbing Vivian's lifeless body from the bed. "Vivian, get up! I'll take you to eat grilled fish." Mr. Xander and the nurses rushed forward, trying to restrain him. Dr. Adrian let out a desperate roar. "Let me go! I need to take her away!" Mr. Xander, his patience gone, punched Dr. Adrian in the face. "Get a grip! Vivian is dead!" Vivian had only just passed, her body still soft. In his frenzy, Dr. Adrian pulled her awkwardly, causing her head to hit the bed rail with a dull thud. Mr. Xander, now enraged, shouted, "Dr. Adrian, do you want me to call the police? If you loved her so much, why didn't you do something earlier?" Vivian had come to the department several times while she was alive. She had brought small gifts and helped out in little ways. Everyone had liked her. Now, watching her leave, they felt both relief and sorrow. Relief that her suffering had ended. Sorrow that such a kind person was gone. Dr. Adrian, now devoid of reason, clung to Vivian, silent for a long time. When Mr. Xander returned to the office, he found Isabella sitting at Dr. Adrian's desk, idly playing Minesweeper. This is a hospital. Non-essential personnel must stay away from medical workstations. Mr. Xander felt a profound sadness. Isabella widened her eyes in surprise. Me? I'm Isabella. Isabella, the name that had haunted Vivian's life, the name that had ultimately killed her. And yet Isabella dared to speak it with pride. Mr. Xander couldn't hold back anymore and asked, "I heard you've been back for a while. Why didn't you show up sooner?" "Of course, I was waiting for Vivian to die," Isabella said with a playful smirk. "I didn't want to be the other woman." Mr. Xander turned away in disgust. He didn't want to ask anything more, afraid he wouldn't be able to stop himself from hitting her. Unexpectedly, after Vivian's death, Dr. Adrian did not end up with Isabella. He insisted on handling Vivian's funeral arrangements himself. The body couldn't be kept in the hospital for too long. Vivian was sent to the funeral home that very day. 3 days later, a farewell ceremony was held, and her body was cremated. Dr. Adrian thought Vivian had no family left, and probably not many friends. But on the day of the farewell, the place was packed. The Xander couple was there, along with many classmates he had forgotten, and friends from various walks of life he didn't recognize. Everyone's eyes were red, clearly from crying. Several old classmates approached him, offering solemn thanks. "Mr. Xander, thank you for giving Vivian so many more years. My condolences." Although said with no ill intention, the words struck Dr. Adrian like a slap across the face. He felt utterly ashamed, lowering his head with tears in his eyes. "This is a paper kite Vivian made. I brought it with me. And this is a picture of her from that year we went skiing." Many relics were passed into Dr. Adrian's hands. At home, all he had packed of Vivian's were some personal items and a locked diary. It was only then Dr. Adrian realized he had never really known Vivian. She had a wide circle of friends, rich interests, loved off-roading, and craved adventure. Compared to the long, monotonous years that followed, Vivian's earlier life had been more like her name. Short, but brilliant. In recent years, Vivian had been like a withering tree. Cautious, even asking his opinion before eating a bowl of grilled fish. He truly had treated her poorly. "Dr. Adrian, it seems like you haven't eaten breakfast. Why don't you join me for lunch?" Dr. Adrian looked up and saw Isabella's face. She had lipstick on, makeup done, even sparkly eyeshadow. He recognized it immediately. A wave of nausea washed over Dr. Adrian. "You don't have to mourn her, but there's no need to show up here all dolled up." These makeup tips were something Vivian had taught him back when they first got married. Every time they had a date, Vivian would dress up just like this. Dr. Adrian's voice wasn't quiet, drawing the attention of those nearby. Isabella looked flustered. "Dr. Adrian, I didn't mean to—" "Leave," Dr. Adrian ordered, making it clear. Hostile glances followed Isabella as she turned pale and slipped out. Dr. Adrian didn't know what had come over him. Logically, he shouldn't have spoken to Isabella that way, but that's how he felt. He could almost hear Vivian's voice whispering in his ear. "Look, she wore makeup to my funeral. She's such a pretentious coquette. Kick her out." Dr. Adrian knew that if Vivian were still around, she wouldn't be angry at him for this. The date for the heart transplant was set for early April, during the Festival of Ancestors, when all things are reborn. The surgery would be performed by the renowned surgeon Dr. Adrian, and as I lay on the operating table, looking at his face, my heart couldn't help but race. He was the man I had a crush on, but unfortunately, he had always been cold toward me. The anesthetist, trying to ease my tension, joked with a smile, "Do you have a thing for Mr. Xander?" Maybe my face turned a little red. She noticed. She placed the mask over my nose and mouth and gently said, "Relax, make a wish." I closed my eyes and silently thought, I want to marry Dr. Adrian. Perhaps because of that wish, I had a very long dream. I dreamt of things that never happened. It was more like a nightmare. In the dream, I lived a short and terrible life. Finally, struggling to wake up from the dream, the sound of the monitor beeping next to the bed greeted me. The white ceiling was lit by sunlight reflected from outside, with shadows of trees swaying, birds singing, and grass growing. I moved my eyes and saw the vibrant spring scene, full of hope. "Vivienne, you're awake." I turned my head and saw a familiar face. Dr. Adrian was sitting by the bed, wearing his white coat. Perhaps because of the contrast with the dream, he looked very young at that moment. Seeing me stare at him without saying a word, Dr. Adrian smiled slightly and held my hand. "The surgery was a success. Don't worry. In a few days, I'll take you for a walk." So, the surgery was over. That was good news. Seeing that I still didn't speak, Dr. Adrian gently asked, "Maybe, would you like to be my girlfriend?" At that moment, time seemed to flow back. Memories rushed in. Years of painful memories surfaced in my mind in an instant. I wasn't sure if those things were dreams or from a past life. I blinked, withdrew my hand from his, and looked out at the warm spring light, softly saying, "Dr. Adrian, thank you for everything you've done for me, but I don't like you." The dream had left my thoughts in a mess, and I needed time to think clearly. Dr. Adrian froze, pursing his lips without saying a word. Not long after, I had recovered and met with Mr. Xander during his rounds. Mr. Xander winked at me. "Vivienne, I heard you've been chasing Dr. Adrian. How did that go?" I said. I gave up. "Gave up? Yeah." Mr. Xander smiled again. "That's good too. It's more important to find someone you like who also likes you." On the day I was discharged, the spring weather was beautiful. Mr. Xander personally came to send me off. "You've recovered well. Remember to take your medication. You can eat some grilled fish. Just avoid the chili?" "All right." Then he looked around and said, Dr. Adrian is acting really strange. A few days ago, he said he was going to see you off, but this morning he was acting like he'd been possessed, muttering about atonement. No idea where he went. In the dream, Dr. Adrian drove me home that day. But now, I had to take a taxi myself. I smiled and said, "It doesn't matter." The taxi pulled up in front of the hospital and honked. I waved at Mr. Xander. "Goodbye, doctor, and thank you." That sleep during the surgery was deep, as if in the dream I had lived an entire life. This kind of spring, it felt like I hadn't seen it in a long time. A child ran joyfully past me, holding up a kite. The scent of flowers filled the air. I didn't notice Dr. Adrian standing in the corner, his eyes red and his body trembling as he watched my back. Instead, I turned and walked into the warm spring light that belonged to me.